Canada. And on behalf of everyone at JDRF, I'd like to welcome you tonight to our Let's Talk T1D educational series. We're very excited to present to you tonight with more information on the authorization and regulation of biosimilars. The presentation will be approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and then we will open up the session to your questions. Please pop your questions in the chat as we go, and then we'll open up the floor to discussion once the presentation is over. JDRF is a global leader in working towards an end to type 1 diabetes through research and then funding and advocacy. We also support people and families in the T1D community from the time of diagnosis by helping those living with T1D to have better, healthier, and safer lives while we work to find a cure. The education series offers information on a new topic every other month. And next month, March 23rd, we'll be holding a session on Clinical Trials 101, and we hope you can join us for that as well. We also host a virtual connection series on the fourth Wednesday of every month. This is an unstructured opportunity to connect with others with no formal programming, and to learn more and sign up for the next connection series, which will be taking place on April 26th at 12 p.m. Pacific time and 7 p.m. Eastern time, please visit jdrf.ca. So just a few housekeeping and technical items. We're a big group tonight, so to minimize background noise, please keep your microphone on mute. Note we'll be recording this so that we can post to our YouTube channel, so please turn your camera off if you don't want to be on video. There is a raise hand button. If you need clarification during the presentation on something that comes up, you're welcome to raise your hand. But we really encourage you to use the chat function and to put any questions in that chat, and we'll try to get to them time permitted. We're going to record the session, as I mentioned, and we will post it on our YouTube channel tomorrow, and we will send a follow-up email that has the recording as well as contact information for Health Canada if you have any further questions. So we're very excited to talk about the regulation and authorization of biosimilar drugs in Canada tonight. So please help me welcome our speakers from Health Canada, Denis Arsenault and Laurel Brody. Denis is a manager in the Centre for Policy, Pediatrics, and International Collaboration within Health Canada's Biologic and Radiopharmaceutical Drugs Directorate, or BRDD. In this capacity, Mr. Arsenault leads policy development initiatives for BRDD on a number of files, including regulatory modernization and biosimilar biologic drugs. Laurel Brody is a policy analyst in the Centre for Policy, Pediatrics, and International Collaboration, or CPPIC, within Health Canada's Biologic and Radiopharmaceutical Drugs Directorate, BRDD. In this role, Ms. Brody is the lead analyst for CPPIC on issues including biosimilar biologic drugs and regulatory modernization of radiopharmaceutical drugs. I'm very proud of myself for getting through all of that. So welcome, Denis and Laurel, and I will turn the presentation over to them.
Great. Thank you, Ruth, for that presentation. And thank you to JDRF for the invitation to speak with you this evening for a presentation on the authorization of biosimilars in Canada. So I'll start with providing just a brief outline of what Laurel and myself will be speaking about this evening. So first, I'll just speak a bit about what's a biologic drug and what is a biosimilar. And then I'll talk about the legislative and regulatory framework for the authorization of biosimilars, and also just briefly the process for the review of a drug submission for biosimilars, and also some of the considerations and requirements for data around the authorization of a submission for biosimilars. So data related to quality, non-clinical and clinical data, the authorization of indications, and also the product monograph. We'll then also speak about post-market activities and surveillance, and speak briefly about the insulin biosimilars, issues of switching and interchangeability, and finally we'll speak about stakeholder outreach and education activities that Health Canada has undertaken. So start with a biologic drug. So biologic drugs come from or are fabricated using living organisms or their cells, and they're often made using biotechnology. And examples of biologic drugs include, of course, insulin, but also growth hormones and various antibodies. So biologic drugs, they're used to treat various diseases and medical conditions, including but not limited to diabetes, hormone deficiency, rheumatoid arthritis, and inflammatory bowel disease. Biologic drugs, as we'll see in the next slide, they're generally larger and more complex in composition than chemically produced or synthesized pharmaceutical drugs. So what's a biosimilar? So a biosimilar, it's a biologic drug that's highly similar to a biologic drug that was already authorized for sale. So the drug that's already authorized for sale that the biosimilar is compared to is known as the biosimilar's reference biologic drug. So a reference biologic drug, it's a drug that's authorized on the basis of a complete quality clinical and non-clinical data package. So a biosimilar is always compared to a biologic drug previously authorized that has a complete data package. So a biosimilar to be authorized cannot be compared to another biosimilar. That's a very important point. And just to refer back to the previous slides, I was talking about how biologic drugs are larger and more complex. So to the left here, you'll see a molecule of aspirin, and then next to it you'll see insulin, and then to the right you'll see a monoclonal antibody. So you can see just in terms of the size of the complexity, biologic drugs are quite different than generic or what we call small molecule drugs that are chemically synthesized. So the regulatory approach. So Health Canada has really developed a robust science-based regulatory framework for authorizing biosimilars under the Food and Drugs Act and the Food and Drug Regulations. And the specific regulatory framework and requirements for biosimilars are actually outlined in a guidance document on biosimilars called the Guidance Document Information and Submission Requirements for Biosimilar Biologic Drugs. So biosimilars are manufactured to the same standards as any other biologic drug, and they're authorized after a scientific evaluation by Health Canada. And one important point to keep in
Sorry,
mind is
Denis, if I could just
yes,
stop you. The slides
yep,
are moving very fast without being at the right spot. Like now you're at slide number 9. Is that where you meant to be? I think because it says non-clinical and clinical studies, but you're talking about slide way before, I think.
okay. My apologies. There seemed to be a problem there, so I'm going to bear with me one moment.
This is what happens with technology. And it's if you need me to take over the slides, just let me know, and I think I'm able to move them as well. So we'll
Okay.
see how it goes. But I think you were on slide 5, I think.
Yes, I was on slide 5.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So just on the last point, so biologic drugs, one important thing to note is that they're naturally variable. And so for any biologic drug, whether it's an innovator drug or a biosimilar, there's going to be variance from one lot of product to the next. So biologic drugs are naturally variable between products, but also within lots of the same product. So because of that natural variability, a biosimilar can be shown to be highly similar to its reference product, but not identical. And that's given just the very nature of what biologic drugs are. So I could talk a little bit about the drug review process. So it begins really with a sponsor providing a drug submission to Health Canada. And, Health Canada, we're not in a position to, in a sense, force sponsors to provide us a submission. It's really up to a sponsor whether or not they want to file for market authorization of a drug in Canada. Once we receive a submission, it goes through an initial kind of screening and review process. It's more of an administrative process to make sure that the submission is complete and contains all of the documentation information that a submission would normally require under the requirement of the regulations. After that, it goes through a scientific review process, and there's kind of two key components there. On one side, you have a clinical evaluation looking at safety and efficacy of the drug. And the other side, you have qualities, chemistry, manufacturing, and the quality component for biosimilars in particular is quite important, as we'll see. There's also an evaluation of the labeling. So all of the information that will be provided, that the sponsor proposes to provide to healthcare professionals and patients about the drug. So that includes things like the product monograph, which you may already be familiar with. So once we go through that review process, Health Canada makes a decision on whether or not we will issue a notice of compliance for that drug product. So that's kind of at a high level, that is the drug review process. So data requirements, a few key concepts. So for any new biologic drug, including, for example, a drug with a new active substance, a sponsor has to really independently demonstrate the drug's quality, its safety, and its efficacy. And safety and efficacy are typically, demonstrated through clinical trials. For a biosimilar, a bit different. So a sponsor has to independently demonstrate the quality of the drug, so to show that they can consistently manufacture the proposed drug in question at a high level of quality and consistently. They also have to develop comparative studies that show that the biosimilar is highly similar to the reference drug to which it's being compared. And they have to demonstrate that there are no expected clinically meaningful differences in efficacy and safety between the biosimilar and its reference drug. So when we say that a biosimilar is highly similar to its reference product, what we mean is that there's essentially, bottom line, there is no clinically meaningful differences in their efficacy and safety. The biosimilar is authorized based on the totality of the evidence from structural, functional, non-clinical, and clinical studies. And I'll get a bit more into that in the following slides. So, structural and functional studies. Structural and functional studies are required to show that the biosimilar is highly similar to its reference biologic drug. So when we say structural and functional studies, what we're looking at is these are technical studies that are examining the structure, the biochemical and physical structure of the molecule, as well as its biological activity. So it's really a detailed analysis through various techniques to examine really the structure of the molecule itself. And it's a side-by-side comparison, the molecule of the biosimilar and the molecule of the reference biologic drug. So this involves extensive side-by-side comparisons of stability of the product, the biological activities of the molecule, its physical chemical properties, its immunochemical properties, as well as purities and impurities. Structural and functional studies are generally considered to be more sensitive than a clinical study in detecting differences between a biosimilar and a reference biologic drug. And the structural and functional studies provide the foundation of evidence for biosimilar authorization. So for a sponsor to develop to essentially demonstrate biosimilarity, it's a step-by-step-wise approach. And the basis, the foundation, is really these structural and functional studies. And the lion's share of information of the demonstration of similarity should come from these structural and functional studies because, as I just mentioned, it's considered to be more sensitive than clinical studies in showing similarity. Now, once similarity has been demonstrated through structural and functional studies, the sponsor then moves on to non-clinical and clinical studies to address any potential areas of residual uncertainty based on the structural and functional studies. So the non-clinical studies, those examine cells and compare the effects of the biosimilar with the reference biologic drug. And the clinical studies in humans essentially are intended to show that there's no clinically meaningful differences in efficacy and safety between the biosimilar and the reference biologic drug. So because of that stepwise approach, so as I mentioned, so the non-clinical and clinical studies, they're meant to resolve outstanding or residual areas of uncertainty in terms of similarity. And because of that, the clinical study programs for any given biosimilar, they're going to be tailored to that specific product. And it all depends on the residual uncertainties that arise after the structural and functional studies. Immunogenicity is another key consideration. So the immune system has evolved over time to recognize foreign substances in the body. So biologic drugs, because they're usually given by injection, they can cause the body's immune system to react to them. So that reaction is referred to the immunogenicity of the product. So immunogenicity often has no impact and it's only really detected by various scientific methods. But in other cases, it can have an actual impact on patient safety, for example, by causing an adverse reaction, or it can affect how well the drug works. So because for that reason, an assessment of immunogenicity is always required for the authorization of a biosimilar. Here, just briefly, I just wanted to illustrate some of the information requirements for a biosimilar, how it compares to an innovator biologic drug. So in terms of the requirements for a biosimilar, it's quite extensive and is very comparable to the information requirements for a new biologic drug. It's just the nature of the data that's provided that varies. And to the right, you'll see in the light blue there for the comparative quality study. So that's referring to the structural and functional studies. So as you can see, those play an important role, and they're an important part of the data requirements for submission for a biosimilar drug. So once taking the totality of all that evidence from the structural and functional study, the non-clinical and the clinical, once similarity, high degree similarity has been established, it doesn't mean that the biosimilar and the reference product are identical, as I've mentioned, but it does show they're highly similar, and that essentially has two consequences. So it means that the existing knowledge of both products is sufficient to predict that any differences in the quality attributes should have no adverse impact on the safety or the efficacy of the biosimilar. It also means that the non-clinical and clinical data that was generated for the reference biologic drug are relevant to the biosimilar. So in terms of the authorization of indication, so once a biosimilar is shown to be highly similar to its reference product, we can authorize the biosimilar for the same indications. That being said, a sponsor can choose which indications it is seeking for its biosimilar. So indications authorized for any given biosimilar depend on various factors. So a biosimilar manufacturer can choose to not include all the indications as a reference biologic drug. And certain indications are related to certain patents and data protections, and so basically related to intellectual property. So because of intellectual property considerations, some indications we are not able to authorize them as long as those indications are essentially related to intellectual property considerations. So a risk management plan is submitted as part of any new biologic drug submission. So a risk management plan sets out the activities to be carried out by drug manufacturers to monitor and detect potential safety signals following market authorization. A risk management plan of a biosimilar generally includes the monitoring and risk minimization activities that are similar to those in place for the reference biologic drug. So for biosimilars, all identified and potential risks associated with the use of the reference drug and details of how these risks will be addressed in post-market settings should be spelled out, and specific routine or additional pharmacovigilance and risk activities, risk minimization activities should be outlined. So in essence, the risk management, when a biosimilar is authorized, its risk management plan essentially it mirrors, because it is highly similar to its reference biologic drug, the risk management plan for a biosimilar essentially mirrors the risk management plan of its reference biologic drug. So product monograph. So product monograph is another key component of a submission, as I mentioned before. So the product monograph is essentially a factual scientific document containing pivotal information on a drug. So along with other information that may be required for the optimal, safe, and effective use of a drug, the product monograph also informs patients and healthcare professionals of various details regarding the drug. So we require manufacturers to ensure that the product monograph for each product is up to date. And at the time of authorization, the safety information in the product monograph for a biosimilar is based on the information in the reference biologic drugs product monograph. And product monographs for any biologic drug can be found through the Health Canada Drug Product Database. Post-market activities. So once a biosimilar is authorized, it's considered to be a standalone product. So as I mentioned before, the product monograph, the risk management plan for a biosimilar, when it's authorized, those documents are essentially based on those of the reference product because the biosimilar is highly similar to its reference product. However, once it's authorized, it's considered to be a standalone product. So for this reason, manufacturers have to assess the need to update their product monograph when a safety update is made to the reference biologic drug, to another biosimilar, or to any other drug that has shares the same active ingredients, and there's a plausible drug class effect. So, so whether you're a biosimilar manufacturer or you're a manufacturer of the innovative product, you have to update your product monograph. In addition, Health Canada can also issue notices and orders for label changes if we deem that it's necessary to prevent injury to health. Other post-market activities include lot release, and the lot release is an important aspect of post-market activities. So products essentially are assigned to different categories of risk. So what we do is that we essentially do test sampling of lots of various products to ensure that products are of quality once they're actually sent on the market. And so the sampling activities and the testing activities that we do essentially is done on a risk assessment basis. So some types of biologic drugs pose a greater risk than others, and there's various factors that play into how we categorize the risk of a product. So there's a ongoing program within Health Canada to sample biologic drugs before lots of those drugs are released. There's also biologic product reports. So sponsors are expected to submit what we call YBPR, so yearly biologic product reports. And those reports really provide information on ongoing safety and quality evaluation of the product, consistency of the manufacturing process, and highlight any trends in terms, for example, safety signals. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Laurel Brody, who will take us through the rest of the presentation. Laurel?
Thank you, Denny. And thank you for JDRF for having me here tonight. So for the post-market surveillance, Health Canada monitors the safety of all drugs on the market, including conducting market surveillance, monitoring of adverse reaction reports, and investigating problems, complaints, and taking action as appropriate. Drug manufacturers are required to monitor side effects and report any new information about serious side effects. Health Canada has not observed any unexpected post-authorization safety signals for biosimilars marketed in Canada. Therefore, the efficacy and safety profile of the biosimilars authorized in Canada do remain in line with those of the reference biologic. Next slide, please. Authorized biosimilars and insulin biosimilars. So far, Health Canada has authorized 51 biosimilars. Out of those 51, Health Canada has authorized a number of biosimilar insulin products, as you can see on the table in this slide. Next slide, please. Switching. Health Canada considers switching between authorized products to refer to a change from routine use of one specific product to routine use of another specific product. Health Canada expects no differences in efficacy and safety following a change in routine use between a biosimilar and its reference biologic in an authorized indication. Patients and healthcare providers can have confidence that biosimilars are effective and safe for their authorized indications. Next slide, please. Interchangeability. In Canada, the term interchangeability often refers to the ability for the patient to be changed from one drug to another equivalent drug by the pharmacist without the intervention of a prescriber who wrote the prescription. Health Canada's authorization of a biosimilar is not a declaration of equivalence to the reference biologic. This authority to declare two products interchangeable rests with each province and territory according to its own rules and regulations. Next slide, please. The Biosimilars Stakeholder Action Plan. To respond to stakeholder feedback, Health Canada established a plan to develop targeted information materials on biosimilars and how Health Canada regulates them to increase confidence in biosimilars. drawing from our international counterparts, including the European Medicines Agency and the US Food and Drug Administration. Health Canada is developing materials that are tailored to the needs of two groups. First, an infographic for patients composed of concise messaging in plain language. Second, a biosimilars handbook for healthcare professionals, which is longer, more detailed, and technical, focusing on the regulatory scientific basis for product authorization. Next slide, please. This biosimilars handbook for healthcare professionals. The first key initiative under this plan has been the development of a biosimilars handbook. To guide the development of this handbook, Health Canada set up a working group composed of departmental subject matter experts and representatives from associations representing a range of healthcare professionals. The handbook will focus on clarifying two aspects: how Health Canada regulates biosimilars in both the pre- and post-market spaces, and the scientific basis for which biosimilars are authorized under the Food and Drug Regulations. The handbook's objective is to enhance the healthcare professionals' understanding and confidence in biosimilars. A draft of the handbook was posted for public consultation in February 2022. You can find this draft handbook on Health Canada's website by typing Handbook for Healthcare Professionals in the search field on the Health Canada's landing page, or you can simply search Google by typing Health Canada and Biosimilars Handbook, and it will come up as part of the search results. We are aiming to publish the final version of this handbook in the spring of 2023. Next slide, please. For more information, in addition to the handbook for the healthcare professional, our website also has, previous slide, Denny. Thank you. In addition to the handbook, our website also has a landing page dedicated to providing information materials about biosimilars. It has a collection of links to other materials, such as a fact sheet for biosimilars biologic drugs, which provides information about biosimilars and their regulation in Canada. 2 statements from International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, which Health Canada contributed to with some of their international partners. One statement is for healthcare professionals, and the other is for patients and the general public. Next, an online drug product database containing product-specific information, including product monographs for drug authorized in Canada. This database is updated nightly. Using the online query, for example, you can find all the biosimilar insulins authorized in Canada at any given time. You enter insulin in the active ingredient search field in this query and check mark the biosimilars biologic drug field and click search at the bottom of the page. The search will display a list of drug identification numbers, or DINs, of insulin biosimilars. The product details, including a link to the product monographs for each DIN, are available when you click on the DIN number in the display list. Our biosimilars landing page also has links to an online database for the regulatory decision summaries, the summary of basis of decision. These explain Health Canada's decisions for drugs, including biosimilars. And finally, the landing page has a link to the Canadian Vigilance Adverse Reaction online database, containing information about suspected adverse reactions, known as side effects to health products. You can access this biosimilars landing page by typing in biosimilars in the search field on the Health Canada's landing page. Last slide, please. Finally, for any questions you may have regarding the authorization of biosimilars for sale in Canada, please contact Health Canada at the following email address. Thank you, and we will now take your questions. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much. I know that was a lot of information that both Ginny and Laurel went through, and thank you very much. I see the chat is going a little bit crazy, and I'll do my best. Just the first thing before I get to anything in the chat, Ginny, when you had mentioned the sponsors earlier, who's that referring to?
The sponsor will be the pharmaceutical company. So it's the pharmaceutical company that actually submits a new drug submission to get a biologic drug, whether it's an innovator drug or whether it's a biosimilar. They have to submit a new drug submission with the requisite data.
Okay. And there's a lot of questions about insurance and things that I don't think Denis and Laura will be specifically able to address, because they're obviously people who oversee the authorization and regulation. So hoping that this presentation provided you a little bit of information about the rigor that it goes through before it's approved, but I'll do my best to go through this. And JDRF as an organization does support patient choice, and everything that you have to do to manage your insulin is obviously something to speak to with your healthcare provider and your endocrinologist. But we do have an Access for All and advocacy program, and I'll drop some information in the chat before we leave about that. But Lisa had just asked what no meaningful differences means. Like, what are the acceptable differences in the biologics from the biosimilars to the original drug?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, so maybe just to reiterate one point about the biologic drugs just in general, they are naturally variable. So within any one product, be it a biosimilar or whether it's an innovator drug, there's going to be natural variation from one lot to the next. So there's variation between one drug to the other, but also within lots of the same drug. So when we do an evaluation of a biosimilar, when we say that it's highly similar, you're looking at the actual structure of the molecule, just how similar is it to the actual molecule of the reference biologic drug. So you want to have two drugs whose molecule is almost identical. Again, there's always going to be some kind of variation, again, just because of the nature of biologic drugs. And once you've done that kind of analysis, you do those non-clinical and clinical studies to resolve any kind of outstanding questions or uncertainties there might have around basically how in terms of its safety and efficacy. So when we say highly similar, what we mean, I think we really need to emphasize this, is there's no clinically meaningful differences between a biosimilar and its reference biologic drug. So that's in a sense, that's bottom line, that is the criteria. There can't be any meaningful differences, otherwise it's not similar.
And so Ashley asked for her first question, are these product reports coming from the manufacturers directly, and do they take into account any patient reactions or issues?
Well, the patient reports they're coming from the manufacturers. Now, mind you, they are of course monitoring. So if there are issues that have come up from patients, from healthcare professionals, those will be reflected in those reports. But at the same time, our marketed health products directorates, and maybe I just might for one moment just talk about a bit Health Canada's organizational structure in terms of our branch. So the Biologic and Radiopharmaceutical Drugs Directorate, so we're responsible for reviewing a drug submission, actually authorizing the sale of a biologic drug. Once a drug is on the market for sale, in terms of monitoring activities, the drugs are monitored by the Marketed Health Products Directorate of Health Canada. So they're kind of monitoring. So if there are any kind of safety reports, whether they come from patients, whether they come from healthcare professionals, or whether they come from the sponsor themselves, they're taking a look at all these different kind of information streams, if you will. So the reports coming from the pharmaceutical company, it's one source of information, but it's not the only source of information.
The chat's been very active, so I'm just doing my best to get through them all if I can and go through them one by one. So Debbie asked what they consider adverse reactions, like, I guess, lows or extreme highs, so extreme hypo or hyperglycemic episodes?
It could, I mean, obviously the nature of what qualifies as an adverse reaction, it's going to vary from one product to the next. And again, in the resources that Laurel pointed out to, there's documentation that's certainly available on. I think the previous slide talked about the Canada Vigilance Database. So I think there's resources available in terms of talking about what Health Canada considers an adverse reaction.
And Ashley asked again about the consistency across the provinces. And I think I'll do my best to answer this. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Health Canada just approves the drugs. It's the health plans fall under the province, and they each have their own authority to approve what they're going to cover. And that includes CGMs and flash GMs and the pumps themselves as well.
Yes, and perhaps maybe if I can make just one other comment, because as we were presenting, I saw some of the comments flashing by. So under the Food and Drugs Act and Food and Drug Regulations, when Health Canada reviews a drug submission, when we're reviewing a drug, we're looking at, it's a scientific review. It's the safety, it's the efficacy, and the quality of the drug. Value for money considerations or cost considerations, those do not factor into Health Canada's approval. It's purely a scientific review of the drug to certain terms of basically its safety, efficacy, and quality, and that's on the basis of that's our authority under legislation and regulations. So it's really the financial considerations don't come into play when we do our evaluation and authorization for sale on the market. And that, I think it's an important point to kind of underline.
Yes, thank you. So I think there's a separation between how these drugs get approved, which is what you were presenting on tonight, and then how they end up being used within the province's healthcare systems. Yeah. I do understand some of the frustration that I'm feeling in the chat because people, and it was mentioned in here as well, and we talked about this before, that it is a life-saving drug, and people just want to feel very confident that they know what it is they're using, that they can use it with the pump that they have, and not all of the biosimilars are able to be used with all of the pumps. So these are all legitimate concerns and questions. And you did mention in the French presentation to me that there was the ability to send, if you had any adverse reactions with your pump, with the biosimilar, where you could send that to Health Canada.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can, if you have any concerns, you could actually send it to the email address that you see right now on your screen, and we can certainly forward those concerns to our colleagues in the Market Health Products Directorate. So we don't, again, as I said, we're kind of what we call pre-market. So we do the review of the drug submissions, but we will certainly forward those concerns to our colleagues in the Market Health Products Directorate. And the one, just another point I'd like to make as well, the pumps itself, now those are actually authorized under a separate set of regulations because those are considered to be medical devices, and there's what we call the medical devices regulations, and we have a separate directorate that reviews and authorizes pumps. But I kind of recognize, I hear there's concerns around different insulins working with pumps. So certainly we would love to hear any kind of issues you may have and concerns you may have, and you can forward them to the address that you see on your screen.
Bev asks if the biosimilar safety and efficacy is the same or better than the original biologic.
It is the same, because so in a sense a biosimilar would never be bio better, because then it would not be similar. So again, our bottom line, in a sense, the basic test is does it provide, in a sense, similar levels of safety and efficacy as the reference biologic drug, because that's really in the end what we mean by highly similar. And of course, and as I said, the quality-wise, you have a biosimilar has a separate process for its manufacture, so they have to independently show that they can manufacture a drug at a high quality in a consistent way. And then they also have to show through a comparison to show that essentially there's a similar level of safety and efficacy. And because a biosimilar, because the structure of the molecule itself is highly similar to the reference product. Generally speaking, it's that comparison, that technical comparison of the structure of the molecule gives you a strong sense that the two products are highly similar.
And did you know why it's not yet authorized for the Medtronic or Omnipod pumps?
That I would not be able to.
Okay.
My apologies. That's not. I'm not able to answer that question. I'm not sure. But again, any questions you may have, you can please feel free to forward them on to the address you see.
And Debbie, I can try to track down contact information for Medtronic or Omnipod if that's something you wanted to contact them about. And I can help with that. Just let me know and you can respond in the chat. Okay, you've got both. Okay. CT asks, what is considered a similar safety level, like plus or minus 5% or 10%? I think that's how he's asking that question. CT, did I get that right?
Yeah, the margins. I would have to actually can just confer with some of my scientific colleagues on that because I wouldn't want to make sure I'm providing an accurate answer.
Trying to go through these questions and see if there's anything that we haven't got to. A lot of the questions again are about insurance. So I put the link in the access about our access for all, and I'm just going to put a email address in the chat where you can send any follow-up questions about tonight and any questions you have regarding the insurance. So the chat's going so quickly now. I'm trying to keep up with it. Ashley asked, do we cross references against any countries outside of Canada when we do the checks on a biosimilar?
I mean, actually, our regulatory framework is very similar to the framework you would have in the United States, in the European Union, through the European Medicines Agency, the United Kingdom and Australia and so on. And of course, we confer with our international colleagues in other jurisdictions on a regular basis on specific products, for example. So, Canada's review of a biosimilar submission, it's not done in isolation. Our frameworks and our expectations are very similar to those of other countries such as the US and in the European Union. Because in the European Union, there's the European Medicines Agency, which does the review for all of the European Union countries.
I'm sorry, I see that a lot of questions are coming through regarding the insurance, but that's something that Denny and Laurel can't address. So they can't tell you if the switch will be mandatory or how the various provinces are going to address coverage of the insulins. We have a coverage map, which I'm going to put in the chat as well, that tells you what insulins are covered in what provinces. So just bear with me 1 minute and I will drop that in the chat as well. And just give me 1 second. So there was a question, Denny, about if you're able to, when you're doing the testing specifically for the biosimilar insulins, is it tested in a pump or a pen or in a needle, or is it just comparing the drug against the drug and not how is it administered?
Well, I mean, again, it's the sponsor who's basically providing those studies, which we kind of evaluate. So I would have to kind of confer with some of my colleagues who work specifically on the review of insulins to find out how those studies are structured in that sense.
Does Health Canada work with the provinces when they're doing their reviews of what insulins they'll cover?
Well, again, so market authorization for sale of a drug in Canada is a federal responsibility. So Health Canada is in charge of the review of an authorization for a drug product for sale in Canada. So in a sense, when it comes to the actual drug review itself, we there's no real kind of interaction with the province in that sense, because it is kind of a strictly a federal responsibility.
Do you know if there's any still ongoing clinical trials going on for any biosimilars?
Oof, that is a very good question. They're actually that it's possible that there's clinical trials for certain biosimilars in Canada. We actually have a clinical trials database on Health Canada's website, so it may be possible for people who are interested to do a search in that sense.
Wayne, to answer your question, JDRF does advocate for full patient choice. This includes devices as well. So not just insulin, but for CGM, flash GM, pump, and multiple daily injections, whichever makes the most sense for the individual is something that at JDRF we believe should be the patient choice. So we do, I put some information in the chat as well, but you can also email Wayne the email that I put in earlier, and we can provide you with some more information on that. I know that everybody wants to know if the switch is going to be mandatory and questions about their insurance and how they can cover that. And I'm doing my best to answer the questions as they come in, but unfortunately, those are all very individual specific questions about individuals and their own insurance. And it's difficult for us to answer within this large group. But if you do email us tomorrow, we can do our best to respond to them all individually. Because again, this is all done by the province. And individual insurers as well. So it depends on if you have private insurance that's covering it, if you have provincial insurance that's covering it where you live. So if you do contact us tomorrow, we can do our best to try to direct you in the right place and answer some of these questions. Because Debbie was asking about insulin pump programs making the switch, but I don't think you mean the manufacturer. I think, again, you mean the province. Shelley's asking about travel out of the country. Shelley, can you just expand a little bit on what you mean by that? Like if you're able to take the biosimilar out of country, or would you be able to access it out of the country if you're traveling and you run out of insulin? You can unmute yourself as well if you wanted to just ask it. Okay, both of those. So are biosimilars available outside of Canada? I'm not sure if that's a...
Yeah, can we travel out of the country with these? Like, are they far enough in their study process that we won't be held up at the border, or we won't have to get special certification to take them? And if we are out of the country, how accessible will they be to us?
That will be difficult for me to answer. I mean, we can certainly perhaps follow up on that. I mean, what I would say is these are authorized legal products. These are not controlled substances. So I see, at first blush, I see no reason why you wouldn't be able to leave with these in the countries. This is this is medication that you need. So I see no reason why you would not be able to go to another country with them, because it is not a controlled substance. And again, a lot of these drugs authorized in Canada, but there's similar products, if not the same product, authorized in other countries such as the United States and European countries.
Just responding to someone who asked if the presentation will be posted or sent out to rewatch. It will be posted through our YouTube channel tomorrow. And we will send that link out with an email along with this email address that's in the final slide and some further contact information. So we have a question about why some provinces are reluctant if their biosimilars are deemed safe. Not sure if it's about a reluctancy or if it's just about their covering what they've covered in the past. And some of these are new. I think it was in 2020 and 2021 that two of the patents came up and the new biosimilar was authorized. Is that correct, Denise?
I have to check the exact dates, but what I can say is for biosimilars just in general, as I said, we have 51 authorized right now, but the number of biosimilars authorized has climbed considerably, I'd say, in the last 2 to 3 years. So the number of biosimilars just in general authorized right now has increased significantly just in the last few years. So perhaps that may be a factor, but it would really have to be the provinces to. We'd have to ask the provinces to see what they're thinking on that.
Ash is asking why it's increased so much in the last few years, but I think it's just the patents coming up. So once a patent expires on these drugs, a biosimilar can be then made because someone doesn't own the, I don't want to say the chemicals that go into it, but they don't own what makes that biologic drug anymore. So they don't have, so ideally a biosimilar brings the cost down and makes it more accessible and more affordable because there's not one drug manufacturer that can make this specific biologic, and that's for all of the biosimilars, not just insulins.
Sorry, so it's Ashley, and I'm sorry to speak out. I'm just curious. So would I be thinking of a biosimilar similar to like a generic like medication if it was say like a pill, how you might have like a generic equivalent as opposed to the original form of it? If that makes sense. Is it like, is that how I could relate a biosimilar to kind of understand how it ties to a biologic? So if all these patents have only recently lapsed, so other pharmaceutical companies can now produce this medication without going against a patent. It's similar to kind of like a generic drug. Like if you buy like a store brand of like
Yes.
aspirin, for example, type of thing, as opposed to buying the branded aspirin type of thing.
Sure, yeah, I can respond to that. So one of the during the presentation, I kind of spoke a number of times about a biologic drug and the nature of a biologic drug. So a biosimilar is highly similar to its reference drug because biologic drugs are naturally variable. So you can never actually show that it's identical just because biologic drugs, even again between different lots of the same drug, it varies. Whereas a generic drug, which is kind of chemically synthesized, it can be shown to be bioequivalent, to be essentially identical because it's the chemical composition of the pill, and these are what we call small molecule drugs. So they're small, they're not compared to biologic drugs, they're less complex, and because of the manufacturing process, you can show them to be essentially identical, and they're bioequivalent. Whereas for biologic drugs, again, because of their natural variability, you can never actually say it's identical because biologic drugs vary, which is why we use the term, highly similar. So it comes down to the very nature of the drug. So that's kind of that's why we don't use the term generic for biosimilars. That's why we use a different term, because it comes down to just the nature of the drug itself. You can never show it to be identical the way a generic drug is.
Thank you.
There was a comment that concerned with the comment that each lot can be different, don't see variable results with Novo Rapid from bottle to bottle, but I think that's again a variable in more than one type of insulin and not necessarily something that would be noticeable in this specific individual.
Yeah. Again, so when it comes down to again the quality consideration, so manufacturers, whether it's an original kind of innovator drug or a biosimilar, they have to show that they can kind of manufacture a product at a high quality, at a consistent way. So yes, there is a variability, but of course, there's an acceptable range of variability for a product because it can't vary too much. Otherwise, otherwise the safety and effectiveness of a drug wouldn't be consistent. So there is natural variability, but that variability has to be within a certain range to make sure that anytime you take the drug, it's going to be as safe and effective as you expected it to be. And the variability rate, I think again, I think we're getting slightly more in technical terms. So we'd have to kind of, I would have to ask that question to some of our safety folks, because then of course it could vary from one. There's many types of biologic drugs, so it could vary. But again, there's there's a strongly established sponsors have to show that there's a certain range of variability, and they have to stay within that range, and that range does not affect safety and efficacy.
We only have a few minutes left, so I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions at most, and then we'll wrap it up. Denis actually delivered this presentation fully in French the hour before, so he's been almost 2 hours straight on this, and I'd like to thank him for giving us his time and moral as well. I just had one more question that came in. If it's not working as well as a biologic or needing more and not having as good glucose control, that would be considered an adverse effect that you can report.
So, I mean, yeah, certainly if you have concerns, Health Canada, we need that data. So if people have concerns and they've experienced problems, certainly, of course, speak with your physician, and people are free to, send in adverse reaction reports to Health Canada, and we can actually, again, if you send us an email, we can send you more information about, reporting any kind of adverse reactions you may have concerns about.
I want to reiterate again that tonight was just about explaining how the process of authorizing and regulating, in this specific case, biosimilar biologic drugs. It's certainly not anything that anyone on this call is saying individuals need to be forced onto, or that it's exactly the same. We just wanted to provide everybody with information on how rigorous the process is so that you can have confidence in that, but certainly it's something to talk to with your healthcare providers, with your insurance. We have an advocacy program that does advocate for patient choice in all levels of diabetes management, and we're aware that this is something you manage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No one that has type 1 diabetes ever gets a break or day off from living with this disease, and that you want to make sure that you've got the tools and products and medications that make that management the best for you as an individual. So any questions that you have beyond this that we haven't been able to address today or that are outside the scope of this presentation, please do follow up with us at JDRF, and we'll do our best to address it. If there's people you want to speak with within the manufacturers or providers, we can also provide that information for you separately. I do really want to thank Denis and Laurel for giving us their time on this Thursday night. I hope if you're in one of the provinces that's having terrible weather, like we are here in Toronto, you're safe and you're warm. And thank you. And we love the feedback. I know it's been an intense chat, but I think it's been a good one. And I hope that everybody did learn something tonight and feel like they were heard. And we will definitely, anything you want to send afterwards, please follow up, and also let or message this email as well that's on here too with any kind of concerns that you have about the product that you're using. So thanks everybody so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and thank you again, Denis and Laurel, for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.